ladies and gentlemen, I like to say that this book represents the first time in 7 years that WKRP's ratings have gone up instead of down. And I think that calls for a little celebration.
Right,
so send out for some champagne because we are going to have ourselves a party here this afternoon. What do you think, Travis?
Listen up, fellow babies. It's time for Hold My Order Terrible Dresser, the deep dive WKRP, History and Nerd, WKRP in Cincinnati podcast.
It's been a long season, folks.
It's been a long season. This is a rare evening recording session, Hold My Order After Dark, if you will.
Oh, wow.
So apologies.
Where's my cocktail? I was supposed to get like a Manhattan.
I have a beer.
Oh, nice. I'm teetotaling this evening.
Yeah, we're celebrating. We're celebrating the end of season 2, which means we are halfway through WKRP in Cincinnati, and we're celebrating our 1-year anniversary. This podcast launched on the auspicious date of April Fool's, April 1st, 2015, 1 year ago.
And we should also wish Gordon Jump another happy posthumous birthday.
That's right. Happy birthday, Gordon Jump. Boy, smiling down on us, we can only hope. Or maybe grimacing the way he does in his Carlson for President poster.
Yeah, so it's been a very full year, Rob, and to be halfway through a project like this only after a year is kind of it's nice to take a look back and see what we've done so far and what we've talked about.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations to you on getting to this milestone to us.
Yes.
Happy 1-year anniversary. Yeah, so we did this at the end of season 1. We did a little review wrap-up episode. Actually, we did 2. We did a clip show and a 2-parter, and I believe it remains to this day our least popular episode in terms of downloads.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Yeah. Which, I'm not saying it was our best episode, but there's some good stuff in there, people. I am still very pleased about the alternate WKRPs and the season 5 episode idea I came up with. But anyway, at the end of the season, we get a little self-indulgent and look back and look forward. And so, no one's going to listen to this one either, maybe, and we can do what we want. Hence the after dark looseness of this episode.
Raise a glass to freedom. Hey! Something you will never see again. No matter what she tells you. Let's have another round tonight. Raise a glass to the 4 of us. Hey! To the newly not poor of us. We'll tell the story of tonight. Let's have another round. Well,
yeah. Where were we? We were going to look back at the season of WKRP as a whole.
What did you think of season 2 overall, Rob? I mean, obviously we haven't gone through the seasons 3 and 4 yet. We each remember kind of our favorite episodes from those seasons we haven't covered so far. But how do you think season 2 fits into the series as a whole?
Good question. I think that we always say the show's not really serialized, so it's not like there's an arc for us to talk about. But the arc that I can see is the kind of the show growing into itself, right?
Yes.
And I just think that the story in season 2 is that it's so much more competent throughout.
Yeah.
It may be that the highs and lows are flattened out. Certainly the lows are flattened out.
Yes.
Like there are just not the failures that happen a couple of times in season 1. At least that's my opinion. And then, of course, there are some great classic episodes. Maybe there's not, would the best episodes of season 2 how do they stack up against Gordon Sims or Fish Story?
Yeah.
Good question. We'll talk about our favorite episodes in a little bit. But just in terms of week by week competence and getting it right and these characters seeming like the people we know.
Yeah.
Yeah. This season just, it's grown into itself now.
It's a really great observation on the highs not being as high and the lows not being as low, because as I was going through and starting to think about my top 3 episodes, I actually had a lot of trouble kind of deciding, how they go 1, 2, 3. You know what I mean? There's definitely an upper tier in this season, but I'm finding it tougher to kind of differentiate which ones I liked absolutely best. And there's no young Master Carlson in this season.
No, there's not.
There's a couple of episodes that are a little slow, a little strangely paced, and a little bit strangely plotted, but there are no, I think, real clunkers this season. There's a couple that are at the bottom for me, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But I think the writing staff had a much tighter ship this season. It feels like there was a little bit more diversity of voices on the writing staff, so you have kind of this variety of different themes and moods in the episodes, but you also get I think, sense that the cast grew. You know, we talked last time about them being in that really crappy KTLA studio
right.
In season 1 and how that was kind of a bonding experience for the cast. The cast seems more confident.
Yeah.
They play off each other much better. We've talked about that.
The performances are better in almost every regard. I mean, what we saw in the first season is that a couple of the cast members came in hot right off the bat.
Yeah.
But there was a big gap between them and the others. And I don't think we're going to go through in detail ranking the cast members as we did in that other season wrap-up, but just everybody's better at what they do. You know, and some of the weaker players, like we've been saying all season, how much funnier Gary Sandy is.
Absolutely.
Right, in this season. And same thing about Jan Smithers. I think that, you know, that they have, you know, most improved award. They have both come a long way.
And I think as far as like relationships that have developed on the show, we've, you know, talked a lot about Bailey and Johnny, but I like the Johnny and Venus relationship having deepened a little bit.
Yep.
I like that Andy is not always their pal, and that there has been an antagonistic sort of relationship set up in a couple of the episodes this season. You know, I think we were a little hard on Les back in the season 1 review.
That's true.
I feel like Les is now more Les.
Right.
More like I remember him.
Yeah.
And I think we've also warned that in seasons 3 and 4, they do go a little bit, maybe off the deep end a little bit and Flanderize him a tiny bit.
Yeah. So he might be at his best right now.
This could be peak Les. Yes,
could
that's what I was trying to get
peak
at.
Les, that's right.
And the Cincinnati Broadcasters Award for the Air Personality of the Year in a station of 5,000 watts or less goes to...
These awards are dumb, man. I mean, really dumb.
But I hadn't thought about it before this conversation started. But, you know, even though the lows in season 2 are not as low, I wonder if it's true that the highs are not as high. Like, it may be just that, you know, the kind of sheer madcap discovery isn't there.
Yes.
But, you know, it's not obvious to me where this season's, you know, fish story or the season's, you know, Turkeys Away, the one that everybody knows, or even it's Gordon Sims is.
Yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about the episodes we like best and what we would pick as our sort of clunker of the season.
So yes, there's no Young Master Carlson. There's no I Do For Now, was another weak one last time around. What do you think? What's the low point in season 2 for you?
I had a little trouble, like I said, kind of differentiating. Both Bad Risk and Sparky, they're not horrible episodes. Each of them has a couple of sequences that are really good. I talked about how much I liked Sparky in the booth with the guy from the indoor soccer team.
Yeah,
I thought that was a really good scene for two people who are not cast members. So I'm going to give Sparky the benefit of the doubt, put it as my sort of second least favorite. I think Bad Risk for me was the one episode that just didn't work. We redeemed that episode in our episode of the podcast.
We had a lot of fun with it. Yeah,
we did.
Yeah.
We went deep on Les, and I think we, again, maybe read a little bit too much into this 1970s sitcom, but I think that was very entertaining for me to go through it. But thinking back on Bad Risk, there's just so many elements of the plot and the characterization and everything else that just doesn't work. And, you know, I was thinking about Herb's dad, but again, that's another episode that our discussion really kind of brought more out of. So I'm going to go with Bad Risk as my clunker of the season.
Okay.
My turkey of the season.
Turkey, if you will. Yeah. Yeah, those are both fine choices, by which I mean that they are both just sort of episodes that leave me flat. I definitely think that Herb's dad achieves a little more pathos and a little more laughs than either of those. I think, and I know this is going to be controversial with you, but you know, there's sort of like mediocre television of Bad Risk or Sparky, but then like just a failed outing for me. Interesting episode, but a failed episode for me is the baseball episode. It just, I couldn't, to me, it was like we were watching someone's home movies edited together to try and make a narrative.
We couldn't have asked for a better, this is another one of these great sort of hoodlum rock situations here, because my third favorite episode of the season actually is baseball.
Damn.
I cannot separate it from my sort of developmental pick last for the baseball team sort of history, and watching it again, for me anyway, was just a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed it. And so if we're going to transition into our favorites, that was my number 3 for the season.
Wow. Okay. There's a, I don't know if it's like Plato or Socrates, some ancient Greek quote about how there's little more pleasurable than the sort of revisiting of an old pain.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is very, very apt for this episode.
Yeah,
I'll agree with you. It was shot again, like we said, on a municipal field in Los Angeles. It was obviously kind of, let's go out and goof around on the baseball diamond. But I don't know, it just worked for me. I really enjoyed all of the little notes, the fashion show of all the different things people were wearing, Moose Carlson, which I had forgotten about. I mean, all that stuff really just kind of, I don't know, it brought it back to life for me, and I really enjoyed it.
Nice. All right.
Do you have your number 3 of the season?
Yeah. My number 3, and I hope this is not a cheat because it's the 2-parter. My number 3 would be For Love or Money.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you came into this season raring to go on that episode.
Raring to go on this one. I know that a lot of it hangs on on an outsider, on a guest star who's messing things up, and I know what that does to you. But man, she's in the pantheon of great guest stars. And and just Johnny and Buffy together. Maybe it's because of all the years Lenore and Terry and Pete and I spent quoting this episode. But yeah, this one just has a place in my heart.
Oh, it's fantastic. Why don't we do this like draft style? Why don't you give me your number 2 this time, and I'll go back with my number 2 afterwards.
Okay, all right. So my number 2, and boy, this could my 1 and 2, I went back and forth.
Are we going to have the same 1 and 2 again? I got a feeling we might.
It's possible. It really was about whether I wanted the sort of the bigger, zanier ones or the kind of, I don't want to give it away, but my number 2 is Carlson for president.
Interesting. Okay.
It just builds and builds, and there's some great funny moments, and of course, there's nobody I love more than Mr. Carlson, and they milk every gag you could out of Art's attempt to run for office. First his sincere attempt, and then his attempt to lose, and it just builds and builds and builds. And I think that last 5 minutes we talked about in the episode is just a tour de force of like joke, kind of pacing you don't normally see on WKRP.
Yes.
And some beautiful moments. Yeah.
My number 2 is God Talks to Johnny.
Nice.
When we talked about, when you talked about its elegance and construction, that's something I hadn't seen either back when I first watched it or even when I watched it for the podcast. And not just thinking about that sort of structure, but also just thinking about how it's almost like it is a little pilgrimage. It's a little story of Johnny's coming to God, being separated from God, and kind of getting reconciled to the experience by the big guy. It's really beautiful. It's funny, and it's pithy, and it gets its point across really, really well. I compare it in my own head because I think my wife and I just saw this episode on TV last night of The Simpsons. Remember Homer the Heretic, where he stays home from church?
Yeah.
And eventually kind of comes to the understanding that, God is in all of the neighbors that help him when his house starts to burn down.
That's right. It's Christian, Jew, miscellaneous.
Yes. Yeah. So I God Talks to Johnny definitely is my number 2 of the season.
Very nice. Well, my number 1 of the season is God Talks to Johnny.
My number 1 of the season is Carlson for president.
Ah, there you go. Okay, well, we're well matched. We ought to do a podcast together. I don't know what to say. That you said that beautifully, but yes, there's something, as I said, the precision of it, the mathematical precision of it, but that does not mean that it's formulaic. It just means that it's like God Talks to Johnny to me is just kind of perfect and pure. There's no guest stars in that episode. Yeah. Everything just comes right out of the characters. Another episode that I really liked is the season finale.
Yes.
Most Improved Station. And for the same reason, that it just sort of like builds out of the characters that we know and love. And I like what you say about it's a pilgrimage. And then it's just, there's something about that episode that seems like uniquely WKRP to me. I just can't see another show having that be the bit. First, the guy talks to God but can't understand it. And then second, I want you to become a golf pro. That just sort of...
Oh, it's great. So I was being very quiet while you were talking about Carlson for president, because for my money, probably, and again, we'll see what I think after seasons 3 and 4, but the funniest 2 minutes of WKRP is that final sequence where the big guy is trying to lose the election and just says everything he possibly can to do so. And we made that comparison back in the halcyon early days of the Donald Trump campaign, that maybe this is what Donald Trump was trying to do.
It was possible to joke about Donald Trump back then. When was that?
It was only like 3 or 4 months ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, you know? But the idea of intentionally losing the election, I mean, it's just such fertile ground for comedy. You know, it allowed us to talk about a lot of the political stuff we've been talking about in these first 2 seasons. In context, it's the first time we've ever had sort of politics explicitly talked about on the show. Those candidates, they're all caricatures, but they're caricatures of specific things that were going on at that time. And so that, the sequence at the debate is also a big favorite of mine this season.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely.
Can I have your attention, please? Attention, everybody. I'd like to make a little pep talk here. Now, I know that the pollsters have me way out in front right now, but I want you to completely ignore that, all right? I want you to keep pulling together and make every effort possible to put my candidacy right down the dumper, okay?
So, as you've probably read on the blog, on the Facebook page, on our Twitter, we've been angling for, no pun intended, angling for listener mail this season. We're going to do a repeat, and we're really only doing this repeat from season 1's listener mail senders because he did win the Watergate pants contest someone could win.
Yes.
It's our friend Jeff Raymond. And we thought this would be a good time to kind of intersperse some of the listener mail into this wrap-up episode. So Jeff is talking about sort of how we look at the season 2 episodes, and I'll read his email. Hi, Mike and Rob. So I just finished up the last season 2 podcast episode, which had a serious episode with the Venus plot and the more zany finale. And I'm wondering, now that we're halfway through the rewatch, which episodes you feel are more successful? So between zany and serious. I remember you talking about the resistance to the sort of slapsticky comedy by the writers in season 1, but also that some of the more memorable episodes in the popular lexicon are the wackier ones like Turkey Drop. So with either a modern look back or just in terms of overall, which type of episodes do you think work better?
Hey, Jeff. Good question. Yeah. I think, I'm not sure what you think, Mike, but I would say that in the same way as we said, the highs and lows are evening out as we move on with maybe, some notable exceptions, thinking of In Concert. As we move on, they're less extremes to one extreme or the other, that they sort of like, it seems to me that they get better at modulating tone, that there's the tone is kind of all over the place in season 1. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the lesson of Fish Story is that they should not fear the zany, wacky thing. And I think they don't anymore. On the other hand, this show can do, serious, thoughtful stuff quite well for a show of its time. I think my favorite episodes, just based on what the ranking we just gave, kind of roll down the middle. Like, they're not necessarily zany. Why does it have to be zany? They're not necessarily zany, but take a, maybe like God Talks to Johnny, this sort of, this bizarre premise, but everything pulls everything else out of character. And, one of my favorite episodes, at least in my mind, that we haven't gotten to yet is Frog Story, which, takes this one weird hook that Herb is trying to get paint off a frog. And in the same way as God Talks to Johnny, he just goes to every character and gets these sort of like great moments out of everybody.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I was thinking about For Love or Money, and I was thinking about how that episode, Buffy's kind of a larger-than-life character, and she and Johnny play off each other so well. But it's a much richer episode when you bring in kind of the serious casualty of the 60s type stuff that we talked about in the in the podcast episode.
Right, and also the emotional grounding that Bailey gives that episode.
Exactly, yes, and that's another great example. I mean, without that little coda at the end of episode 1, the sort of longing, staring off into the distance that Jan Smithers does, you don't have an anchor for that episode. It is just the Buffy and Johnny show, and I think that combine all that stuff together, you've got to have the mix. I mean, WKRP is definitely not a dramedy, but at the same time, it's able to pull off that balance better, I think, than any other MTM show that I can think of. There really aren't that many other MTM series that, I mean, they're all very character-based, but not any other ones that I can think of other than WKRP did this kind of mix of the serious and the silly.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, Venus.
Hi, Herb.
Listen, how do you get paint off a frog?
Oh, I don't know. How do you get paint off?
I'm asking you. Come here. I want to show you something. Excuse me. Now look at this. Now, see, and here's a frog who's dying because I painted him. Do you understand that?
Uh-huh.
Venus, surely you must know some sort of black thing. You know what I'm saying?
A black thing?
Yes, you know, some sort of plantation voodoo thing that helps get paint off a frog.
Oh, what?
So while we're being self-indulgent, we want to take a moment now, and we're not going to wait till the end of the podcast to thank all of our listeners and all of our supporters and our friends and people who have written in and liked us on Facebook and retweeted us and shared us with social media and given us those almighty clicks. We're going to do it right here in the middle of the podcast while everybody is listening. Once again, here we are a year into this. And again, I can only sort of shake my head in amazement and gratitude that there are people who want to listen to us talk about this 35-year-old sitcom, or at least to humor us much more generously than they need to. So if you've listened to one episode, thank you. If you've listened to all the episodes, thank you so much. If you've done any kind of sharing or told anyone about it, thanks a million. And if you've gotten in touch with us, if you've left us a review, if you've left us a star, if you've interacted with us in any way, then, you're God's people, because it's just so much fun to hear from people who dig the show, who dig WKRP. That's the real, we're not getting paid for this, but that is the great reward for doing this.
I think you said when we first started, Rob, we just want to make sure everybody who is interested in a WKRP podcast can find us. And I feel like we've gotten, if not 100% to that goal, we've gotten a good way of the way there. Cause, we know we have hundreds of listeners, just like Johnny said this season in the episode with the garbage strike. We know we've got hundreds of people listening out there, and it's so satisfying and so gratifying to know that we've reached people who love WKRP. Some of them are, our age. Some of them are older. Some of them are actually younger and discovering the show for the first time, which that puts a lot of responsibility on our shoulders for getting people into this 35-year-old sitcom who weren't before the podcast was on the air.
That's right. That's right. No, it's astonishing. And it's a great pleasure to do it.
So we were thinking that we would take this opportunity to talk maybe a little bit about some of the other podcasts we love. We're going to be on hiatus. So if you're one of those people who Rob mentioned who's only listened to one episode, this is a great chance for a first listen. And if you're one of those people who listened to all 25 episodes so far, this is a great time to do a re-listen while we're on hiatus. So download those episodes again and check them out again and talk about them on our Facebook page. But we want to talk tonight about, some of the podcasts that we listen to and love, give them a shout out and let them know that we're listening and that we love what they do.
Absolutely. So, let me see. This funny new medium of podcasting is, it's just exploding right now, of course. Yeah. And there's something for everyone. So, the list we're going to give here, I think, is extremely short and extremely eclectic. And it's just, the things that have sort of hit with us.
Yeah.
There's a few podcasts that I don't think need any press from us. Like sort of some of my favorite podcasts are, big pro or semi-pro podcasts that nobody needs to be told about.
Yeah.
But just in case you don't know, my whole family is devoted to, Judge John Hodgman. Which is, of course, John Hodgman, the humorist, the author, former Daily Show correspondent, PC in the
Reclusive
Apple versus
millionaire.
PC ads, reclusive millionaire, exactly. He does this podcast with the great Jesse Thorne. It's basically sort of like a droll hipster people's court, where people come to the judge with goofy first world problems for him to sort out. But in the long run, like, as I said, we listened to it with the kids, and I actually think that, like, it ends up being, he's very funny, but it's also this really wise and humane show about how to be a good adult. And so that's one that I would shout out to. And then another one, part of the great Maximum Fun stable of podcasts, is My Brother and Me, which is also sort of an advice show, although they insist in every episode that their advice should never be followed. But I always want to play it for the kids because the brothers are so funny and cute and loving, but it's like, it's totally blue and profane, and half the time they spend answering questions from Yahoo Answers that weren't directed to them. And boy, oh boy, Yahoo Answers like the things that people are asking,
like how is Babby formed, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yes, exactly. They're like, there are people out there in desperate need of help.
Wow, what a great segue over to my favorite podcast. Well, so when we first went on iTunes, I will confess I obsessively checked our rankings on the movies and TV page on both the American, and eventually I found out how to get onto the Canadian iTunes, which was a big deal for me, being down here in the States. But there was a podcast starting up right around that time that was basically just mic bait, basically. And it is a minute-by-minute look at the movie Goodfellas.
Yes.
Done by the three guys from iFanboy. I've been definitely dropping my little dollops of Italian-American culture and observations that I have seen.
Let me just back up in case people missed what the audacious premise of this.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Is that every episode of the podcast, they analyze 1 minute of the movie Goodfellas. They're working through the movie minute by minute.
Yeah. This is a fairly, well, I wouldn't say it's a popular format, but it's definitely it's a format now. It was started by the Star Wars Minute guys.
There's a Star Wars Minute, and they did the whole original trilogy. I think
there's also a Big Lebowski one out there, which I'm curious about.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can commit to that. The whole thing about the Goodfellas Minute is that since I got in on it on the second week, I've been able to listen to it daily and not fall behind. And I listen to it while I have my breakfast, and it's like the best, It's the moments I love about that podcast are when they start doing the stuff that just only somebody who grew up on Long Island in the 1980s would know about. And just sort of like that milieu that movie takes place in, that I live 100 and some odd miles away from New York City, but it's so alien to me. And it's so great to kind of hear their insider's view on that. And it's a great movie, and it's a great movie to revisit in this very sort of detailed manner. So, and it is, a minute-by-minute podcast is a very quixotic thing to do, and I give these guys all the credit. They're coming close to the end now. They're going to be ending in the next, I think, 4 weeks or so.
Wow.
So good luck on that last push, guys.
Nice.
I salute you. And the other podcast that I am a religious listener now to, and I'm not just saying this because I did a guest spot on there a few weeks ago, is the Netflix podcast, which takes a look at the movies that are on Canadian Netflix. And our friend Dylan up there in London, Ontario, has got a great series of movie reviews with some very, very smart people. Like I said, I did a guest spot on there, but I did it because I really, really wanted to talk about a movie I really love, Beyond the Black Rainbow. And I had a blast doing it. And if you have the chance, check them out. Bound to find at least probably a dozen or so movies that you've seen and love that they will talk about in great detail.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're sort of, I would consider them friends of the podcast. I knew Carolyn Deason, who's a regular guest before the podcast, but I've also become a huge fan of it. Reviewing the things that are on Canadian Netflix is a kind of funny, I would say, slender reed on which to hang a podcast. Especially, I think when Dylan got started,
there was nothing on there.
You have to remember that it's sort of like doing a podcast about Crackle. Do you get Crackle on any of your devices? Crackle is like the free Netflix of just
I don't know what Crackle is. I thought you were talking about those little candy bars that come in the Halloween pack.
No. We bought a DVD player that we didn't even know was smart. We thought it was just a DVD player, and we got it home and turned it on and found out that we had access to like every episode of Good Times and a bunch of weird Japanese anime via Crackle.
Wow.
So anyway, especially when they started out, I think that like a lot of the stuff that they were doing was, crap. But they've done such a great job with it, and just the project of Netflix or of the Goodfellas Minute is similar to what we're doing.
Yes.
Which is that you take something which you might not think would sustain critical attention, and just the quote the Grail Marcus quote from our very first episode, you sort of give it sustained attention, and you almost look through it to see something else. So just as you said, the Goodfellas podcast, when you're looking at every minute, you can't help but talk about other things, talk about where they're from, where the guys doing the podcast are from, the milieu that it's part of. In the same way, some of my favorite episodes of Netflix are ones where they take these kind of, disposable movies from their childhoods. And these are young people, not decrepit old people like us, but, their childhoods are movies like, Mortal Kombat or Adventures in Babysitting, or, and talk about why those movies mean a lot to them.
Yeah.
And, it's this kind of how we construct our autobiography through disposable culture is really, to me, that's someone who isn't into this stuff might think, oh, that's the most shallow, superficial thing there is. But I really think that, that it is a very interesting exercise. Did you read the Umberto Eco novel, The Mysterious Flame of Queen Loana?
Oh, yeah. So that's the guy who had, amnesia, and he reconstructs his life through the old pulps that he read when he was a kid, basically.
That's right. He has this weird amnesia where he can't remember anything. He can't remember his family. He can't remember his life, but he can remember everything he ever read.
Yeah.
And so in order to try and reconstruct his life, he goes back and rereads everything he ever read. And of course, because the novel's written by Umberto Eco, it's a tour of all of the pop culture that a 60-something Italian man would have lived through.
Yes.
But it's a great, even though it's very different than the specific comics and books and things like that are different than what we read. I think it's a terrific sort of thing about how you build yourself out of, bricolage. We build ourselves out of ephemera.
Yeah. And let us not forget, Rob, that Umberto Eco's favorite TV show ever was Starsky and Hutch. So
yes.
Rest in peace, Signor Echo, and please, I hope that you're getting to watch every episode right now.
Of Starsky and Hutch.
In some kind of limbo dimension where you can get any DVD you want. Oh, you know what? Maybe he's watching the series of Starsky and Hutch that never got made.
Exactly, the unmade 11th season or something like that. Yeah. And while we're talking about sort of these tightly focused podcasts, one that I also wanted to give a shout out to is because it really I think helped inspire this podcast is Just One More Thing, which is the Columbo rewatch podcast.
Yes,
done by R.J. White and the great Calamity John Morris, along with a ton of guests. And I wasn't a Columbo watcher. I think I'm just young enough that one went over my head. But I still find the podcast riveting. And it really gave me confidence that you can pull this off.
Well, one thing I've noticed about them is that the Columbo fans tend to be way more hardcore about being pure to the source material. You WKRP fans out there, you've been so indulgent. We thank you so much for letting us go off on the tangents that we do. I'll tell you, if we did a Columbo podcast, we would not be allowed to do that because those Columbo fans are intense.
That's right. Yeah. Well, for me, the tangents, we always go back and forth about the correct balance, the correct ratio of tangents to WKRP.
Yes.
But, I don't know if this itself is a tangent, but, in women's history, in American women's history, not just American women's history, in women's history and gender history, the kind of, the really exciting intellectual turn. Well, women's history was exciting itself. It's sort of when women's history kind of flourished in the 1970s and 80s. But then in the 80s and 90s, the turn that people made was from women as a topic of history to gender as a lens for history. That is, in other words, the realization that yes, you can talk about women and that's important, but gender is everywhere. And gender is a lens you can look through to look at anything. So you can do a gendered history of war, or a gendered history of foreign policy, or a gendered history of the economy, or a gendered history of anything. And, this is a little grandiose, but what I'm saying is that WKRP can be a topic or it can be a lens. Columbo can be a topic or a lens. The 73rd minute of Goodfellas can be a topic or it can be a lens through which we see a world.
Absolutely.
My apologies to all women's historians.
It's just a parallel, Rob. We're not saying that they're equal in importance. We're just paralleling. Absolutely.
Did Tom ever tell you about my painting?
No.
Look at this.
It's beautiful.
I like this one. The dog, one dog goes one way and the other dog goes the other way.
One is going east and the other one is going west. So what?
And this guy's saying, what do you want from me? Guy's got a nice head of white hair. Look how beautiful with the dog. It looks the same.
Looks like somebody we know.
I mean, without the beard. No, it's him. Oh, it's him. Holy.
Two other podcasts I want to mention. One is another friend of the podcast, Dan Miles.
Oh, yeah.
Dan Miles has a podcast called the Friends of Dan Music Podcast.
Right.
And, he was one of the first people with any kind of social media juice to hear us and find us and discover us. And he put a lot of people in touch with the podcast, I think. So we owe him in that sense. And then, talk about autobiography through pop culture. I have to admit, I haven't listened to all of his podcasts, but he does this podcast where he does talk about deep dives. He does deep dives into different bands. So I listened to the Rush one, and he had 5 guys, and they all talked about the first time they saw Rush, and then they talked about the 17th time they saw Rush, and then they talked about how seeing Rush at this stage of their life is different than how seeing Rush at this stage of their life, and how Rush got this one guy through his divorce, and how Rush and all of this along with a ton of musical knowledge. And he gets real guests and sort of, name people. Then he has another podcast now with the actress Olivia Dabo, who you may recall from The Wonder Years.
Yes.
But they just rap on their podcast. I don't mean they rap. They talk to each other on their podcast. So anyway, Dan is a great friend of the podcast, and so I wanted to give him a shout out. And then, there are a lot of history podcasts, and being a historian has in some ways kind of ruined me for a lot of history podcasts. So I don't love a lot of history podcasts, but the one that I like and that I think you like, Mike, is a history podcast in the guise of a role-playing game podcast, which is Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff.
Yeah, Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff let's put it this way. If you are into that sort of continuum of role-playing games, alternate history, occult history, the kind of stuff we talk about basically in the Cincinnati Triangle, you've got to check out Ken and Robin. It's a great podcast. Each segment is kind of self-contained. I'll confess, I haven't listened to every episode of their podcast either, but when I see a topic I want to listen to, I grab the episode, I listen to the segment, and, 15, 20 minutes later, I am illuminated on some topic or another, and it's just fantastic. Yeah,
you always learn something. And then also, it's just a sensibility that I really like and respect, which is kind of history as kind of cut up, mash up, remix, box of toys, which we're going to play with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
So that's another one.
When you talked about Dan Miles's podcast and how he had quote unquote real guests, it reminded me of another listener mail that we got, which I'm going to read right now. And from Twitter, it's, Todd Maffin asks, and I shouldn't say Todd is the only person who's asked this. Chuck Klosterman also asked us on Twitter if we're going to ever get a guest.
That's right. Another high-profile, quote, friend of the podcast. He at least retweeted us and seemed to like the idea, is Chuck Klosterman. We're pronouncing his name right now.
Yes. Todd asked us, any chance you guys can get one of the WKRP stars on the show? I bet they'd say yes if you asked. Well, Todd, I'm just going to say this tantalizingly, okay? We do not have any plans at this point to have any of the cast, crew, writers, or anybody else who is on WKRP on the show. But I want you to watch this space because we've got some special events coming up that might be a little interesting for you in the next couple seasons of the podcast. I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to leave that one out there.
A little teaser.
Yeah.
Jan, call us.
Hugh, I want to talk UFOs with you. Call me.
Welcome back. Your dreams were your ticket out. Welcome back to that same old place that you laughed about. Well, the names have all changed since you hung around, but those dreams have remained and they've turned around. Who'd have thought they'd lead ya? Who'd have thought they'd lead ya? Back here where we need ya. Yeah, we tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back.
So why don't we pick up on another piece of listener mail? It's actually another one through Twitter, and this is from Thierry Cote. He says, "Hi, just discovered the podcast, and I'm looking forward to going through the archives. The Grey Cup ref, that was our first episode, I think. Makes me think you found the show like me through CBC's 90s reruns in a block with Welcome Back, Kotter." So what this what this comment made me think of is, Rob, is that every time we have a guest on the show, and we really should thank all of our guest hosts at this point. In season 1, Chris Tatro and Jeff Wickstrom.
In season 2, Lenore McAdam, Terry Maguire, Sean Davidson, all terrific guests, and a lot of fun to have all of them on.
Yeah, great. Thank you guys so much for being on the show. We always ask our guests how they discovered WKRP, and I think it's time we turn that question on ourselves. Now, we've hinted around, and I think probably amongst the episodes we've interspersed sort of our histories with the show, but I want to ask you, Rob, how did you discover, can you think of the first time that you watched a WKRP episode?
Oh, it's hard, I think, I think Lenore said when she was on that she can almost not remember a time when it wasn't part of her life, right? Yeah. And I'm of the same vintage as Lenore, and I feel very similar. I know that I would have watched it as Sean said, I would have watched it in syndication after school, in the 80s. Now, Thierry, the person whose tweet you just read, is very kind to think that I might have discovered the show in the 1990s.
I know.
And I'm not that young. However, I'm really, I will say he mentions CBC 90s reruns in a block with Welcome Back, Kotter. And that actually, I completely know what he's talking about, because, as we discussed when Lenore was on the podcast, my first wave of watching WKRP was as a teenager or a kid in reruns. Then my second wave of watching it was in university. And it was in university that I do remember it being in a block with Welcome Back, Kotter. We talked about this. It actually got cut for time. We talked about this back in season 1, that what I remember is that WKRP came on at about midnight. And then Welcome Back, Kotter came on after it at 12:30. And we would religiously watch WKRP. And then we would, be starting to feel the lateness of the hour. And we would say, well, two things. One, Welcome Back, Kotter, I don't consider a good show, but it has its theme song is wonderful. It's one of the great
John Sebastian, right?
Yeah, one of the great 70s TV theme songs. So we would just watch the theme song and we'd sort of like air drum and air guitar and harmonize with it. And then we would say, and every episode of Welcome Back, Kotter starts with Gabe Kotter telling a joke, usually
like
to
a
his
Borscht
wife.
Belt,
Like
my Uncle Milty or my Uncle, Abe
right.
or whatever, right?
And we'd say, well, we'll give it a chance. If the joke's funny, we'll watch the episode. And I don't think we ever did.
Oh, no.
We always went to bed at 12:33.
Poor Gabe Kaplan. I feel
Gabe.
so bad.
I don't know. The show might, it might hold up. I really never gave it a chance. The other, I was very amused to learn that in its, it was against WKRP, I think, in its last
Yes, that's
season.
right. We talked about that.
So
yes,
they were
absolutely.
rivals. But it was on its last legs by then. This was in the last season where both John Travolta and Mr. Kotter had left, and they were trying to conceal the fact that Mr. Kotter had left simply by having all the scenes take place out in the hallway instead of in his classroom.
Oh my God. You could do that back then. It's brilliant.
Well, how about you, Mike? So yeah. What's your story?
Well, I think our origins are very similar, but the great thing that this podcast has kind of impelled me to do is to go deeper, to delve deeper on this.
Always.
This year, as I've been kind of being a little more expansive in my creative pursuits, I've taken on another quixotic project, which is buying a whole bunch of old TV guides at a local
Yes.
comic book store and just doing a close read of them and, hitting that nostalgia bone, certainly. But, also finding out a lot of really interesting stuff about, what America was like in the 80s, in the early 80s, in the first half of that decade. And so what I've been able to discover is, essentially finding the time slots that WKRP was on that I watched it.
Wow.
And not only am I able to remember now, like what time during the day I watched it, but I'm also able to see what age I watched it at. And these TV guides that I've been doing have been between basically 1983 and 1986 or so. So that's me.
Is TV Guide region specific? Do you have Boston TV guides?
Yes. Yeah. So the first one of these TV guides I got at the store was from Northern Kentucky, which was great for WKRP purposes. We got a lot of local Cincinnati and Louisville stuff. But then I found the treasure trove of Boston issues. And yes, you have local ads, you have local TV, and you're able to see exactly what was on at what hour. So between 6 and 8. Pretty much every night. And that was, that was prime syndication time. They would put the very best sitcom repeats on, from the last 10 or so years in that time slot. So you have a lot of Barney Miller, you have some Taxi, and you have a lot of WKRP. In fact, there was one year where they were on competing stations, in Boston and up in New Hampshire. And so you could essentially flip back and forth between two different episodes of WKRP every night if you wanted to create a kind of, remix version of WKRP. But, that 6 to 8 hour, I was in front of the television between the ages of 8 and 11 pretty much constantly between 6 and 8. Not to get too personal, but my mom would often work late night shifts. And so what would happen is my dad would get home from work when I got home from school. And, we'd sit around and watch TV, or it would be with my grandmother and we would just sit around and, again, watch TV. I was raised by TV, as we've talked about.
So, you say that, but you were watching with your dad or your grandmother. That's a little different in my mind. I was picturing you down in the basement by yourself or whatever.
There definitely were days where I was unsupervised in my television watching, but a lot of the time I watched a lot of Doctor Who with my grandmother, which, again, that's another sort of emotional connection I have to a television show.
That's awesome. That's
7:30, Channel 2, PBS, every night.
I have siblings, and so I always, it was always a negotiation. Like I have an older sister,
fight over the
younger
TV,
sister, and then later a younger brother. And when our tastes meshed, that was great. And when they didn't, I remember, it used to be this huge battle with my little sister Amy every Friday night. Beth and I wanted to watch The Dukes of Hazzard.
Right.
And Amy wanted to watch The Incredible Hulk. And these two were opposite one another. And
that seems awful. Yeah, that's a tough call.
That's a tough call.
Same audience, basically.
Right,
kids
right.
And probably the terminally stoned, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly. We went away one weekend. I think Beth and I went to visit our grandmother one weekend, and Amy missed us so much that she watched Dukes of Hazzard in our absence. And when we came back, she was hooked on Dukes of Hazzard too. And so happiness reigned. And she even had a Dukes of Hazzard big wheel, which on the one hand is very cool. And on the other hand, in the 21st century, as we have all been sort of, reconsidering our relationship with the Confederate flag, I think about the fact that my little sister in suburban Ontario, drove around with this emblem of hate on her big wheel.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, wait, we've got a call on line 1, Rob. We should probably take this one.
I didn't know anyone knew we were here.
We're opening up the lines, for calls from the public. Caller, go ahead.
Mike and Rob, this is Leah Beal, also known as the curator of the WKRP and Cincinnati Tumblr. Great job on the first half of the series. Sorry I wasn't able to join you live to tape last year. That's what being an international jet setter does to you, I guess. I have 2 questions for you. First, what is your favorite piece of WKRP memorabilia that you have? And secondly, How do you guys introduce the show to someone who's never seen it? Do you start straight from the pilot, or are there a group of episodes that you handpick to start things off? Thanks again, guys.
Hi, Leah. It's great to hear your voice. Leah, of course, is another dear friend of the podcast, supporter of the podcast, and as she says, the proprietor of an astonishing WKRP Tumblr, and a hardcore fan in a way that makes us look like sort of pikers, I think. Is that accurate? I mean,
just on a purely, as her first question said, just on a purely memorabilia scale. Yes, very much so.
That's right. It's I think telling that Leah assumes that we will have multiple pieces of WKRP memorabilia, which we have to choose our favorite of. Oh. And I have to admit, I'm not a huge collector of memorabilia. I don't have a ton of stuff. I do have 2 Burger King Empire Strikes Back glasses that I'm awful fond of.
Oh, but, just like Bill in the episode of Freaks and Geeks.
That's right, me and Bill.
Oh my God!
But a recent acquisition that has rapidly became one of my most prized possessions. I think I've mentioned on the podcast Anna Zuschlag, who was former student of mine, my very first PhD student who just recently completed her PhD, which makes me feel so proud and so old. But as a gift to me, after she graduated, she gave me a framed publicity photo of Gordon Jump from the launch, actually from the initial pre-launch of WKRP in Cincinnati. And it's, of course, it's Gordon Jump. It's Mr. Carlson. It's, he's my hero. And it's now up in my office, and I love it. And all these, undergraduates come in and ask if that's my grandfather.
And you just say, yes. Yes,
it is.
I don't have any WKRP memorabilia. I can't find any room for it with the room full of TV guides. But I want to talk about the second question. I think I know why Leah asked this, and it's because Jeff Raymond, in my Facebook comments just for this last episode, talked about how he still hasn't watched an episode of WKRP. He's waiting for the podcast to be over. And I think when she saw that, she was a little aghast.
Is he avoiding spoilers or trying to? It's the opposite of avoiding spoilers.
Exactly, yeah.
He's waiting for the podcast to be over. That is an interesting choice.
Yeah, Jeff wants to hear all of our takes on everything before he even looks at an episode. So Leah wanted to know how we would get people into WKRP. And, doing this podcast, Rob.
Geez, Leah, I mean, what do you want? We're doing a podcast. How's that?
So, we're doing this podcast. We've had occasion to grab a lot of clips, right? And, I've talked about how sometimes it's a little weird to have these audio only clips for sometimes a very visual show. But you know what? YouTube's pretty decent. You can find a lot of the classic bits on YouTube. If I was going to get somebody into the show, I would show them things like Herb and Les's Dungarees versus Suits conversation, for instance. Or I would go and just do like the Cincinnati Triangle bit. You know what I mean? Just little tiny bits that show the quirkiness of the characters and of the situation.
So you do a clip episode, is what you're saying.
Exactly, yeah. We could do a clip show of basically our favorite stuff with no connecting material whatsoever, no Mama Carlson.
Yeah.
And that would be how I would get people into the show. And I think after that, I think they'd be sort of naturally curious to see. And I think the other thing we got to keep in mind, I think that would interest people is that WKRP the music is so essential to the show, and every episode is just so freeze frame worthy when it comes to album covers, posters, all the swag that's in the station. If you know somebody who likes classic rock, if you know somebody who likes, early new wave, or even, you know what I mean? or
the sort of Quiet Storm,
get them to watch the show, because they're going to see and hear a ton of stuff they're going to love.
You make me feel like dancing! I want to dance the night away!
What the hell are you two doing?
It's called rocking out.
You wouldn't understand, Dad. You're not with it. I used to be with it, but then they changed what it was. Now what I'm with isn't it, and what's it seems weird and scary to me. It'll happen to you. No way, man. We're gonna keep on rocking forever. 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 Forever.
One of the topics that this podcast has kind of brought to the forefront in my mind, Rob, in both sort of the pleasurable and the sort of uncanny way, and we've talked about it many times, is really how many sort of nostalgic doors this podcast has opened in our heads. It's a topic I can't get away from. I've always been a very look backwards kind of person, you know. I've only now begun to kind of see it in the matrix of things like literary theory and cultural, you know, criticism and cultural theory, especially in the last couple of semesters. You know, I work in museums. Museums are nothing but looking backwards through the medium of stuff, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I've been taking a really close look. I mean, I've talked about, the theorists who are really into hauntology, and I just this semester worked on a paper that involved using Svetlana Boym's The Future of Nostalgia, which is a great book about post-Soviet nostalgia. All of these sort of issues of, you know, when we look backwards to futures that didn't happen, or, you know, sort of the past that we can only faintly remember, and sort of reconfigure it in our own heads in the present day. And as you said earlier, Rob, I mean, with that Grail Marcus quote, you know, we are looking backwards in order to kind of look forwards in a way.
To look forward and maybe even talking about autobiography a minute ago, to look at ourselves. There's another quote I just remembered. I had the Grail Marcus quote last season. There's another terrific quote that I just called up. You probably know this one. It's Jorge Borges.
Mm-hmm.
A man sets out to draw the world. As the years goes by, he draws a space with images of provinces, kingdoms, mountains, bays, ships, islands, fishes, rooms, instruments, stars, horses, and individuals. A short time before he dies, he discovers that the patient labyrinth of lines traces the lineaments of his own face. So he's drawn himself. You see, you draw all these things and you work for a lifetime and you've drawn yourself. But yeah, nostalgia. I mean, we said this in the very first episode of the podcast that we were going to be talking about nostalgia, and we have been and thinking about it. And nostalgia, as you say, is a occupational hazard for museum workers and historians. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what I want to say is that I would hate it if people heard this podcast and thought that what we were saying is everything was better before. If like that was the message you got, was that it's these two old guys grumping because TV was better before, because politics was better before, because the world is declining. And, you know, there's definitely a thesis that has emerged about political economy and neoliberalism and that sort of thing. And I stand by that thesis, but I would hate for people to hear this and think that the story we're telling is that everything was better before. TV wasn't better before. And, have you read, or are you by any chance watching, has it started that the Stephen King miniseries 11/22/63?
I haven't watched it yet.
Did you read the book by any chance?
Jenny's a huge Stephen King fan. She did read the book. I have not read that book. No.
When I was a teenager, I was a Stephen King completist.
Yeah.
And, you know, then.
Me too.
Yeah. And then I sort of grew out of it. I became a snob and I stopped reading all of his books. And then a few years ago, actually, my friend Sean, a guest on the podcast, said, Stephen King wrote a novel about time travel. Why haven't you read it? You know, and I was like, and I was shamed into reading it. And
it's not just about time travel; it's about the Kennedy assassination.
It's about the Kennedy assassination. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen the show, but the guy goes back in time, and the thing is that the time loop that they have only goes to 1958. You can only go to 1958. And he wants to stop the Kennedy assassination, which means that he has to live in the past for 5 years before he can do it. My favorite part of the book is the long middle section where this, you know, Gen X guy, written by a baby boomer writer, but this Gen X guy has to sort of adapt to life. And there's just sort of the details. Stephen King is so good with details of life in the 50s. But what kept pulling me out of the book, Stephen King, he keeps remarking on how much better everything is. Mm-hmm. You know, that there's this real nostalgic thing going on.
The stakes taste better, that kind of thing.
The stakes taste better. People are nicer. Okay, maybe. But, that's an empirical question that you can only answer with a time machine. But did food taste better in 1958? I would imagine that like the butter and the ingredients tasted better, but it would be so bland. It would be so sort of like, you know, like, and
you've seen those cookbooks from the 50s. You've seen how they use aspic and sort of like all of these other, you know, ingredients we would never use today. Yeah. Absolutely.
I could get on board with eating 1950s food for 5 years. But then, you know, this guy, he's living alone, and there's a scene where he comes home and he turns on the TV, and he says that it's relaxing to turn on the TV. But man, if you knew you had 5 years, if you're in 1958 and you turned on one of those big old TVs, yeah, sure, nostalgia would carry you through a little bit, but basically you'd know that like it's going to be 10 years before anything surprising happens, before anything interesting happens on this machine.
I have often talked about one of my science fiction time travel fantasies is to go back in time and watch television. And it's the TV Guide thing again, but you're right. Like, I idealize it to an extent where
I think it would be like a Twilight Zone terror. Like,
right. It would be like the guy who breaks his glasses at the end of the episode.
Exactly.
Like,
There's going to be no irony for another 10 years.
I know, right? I wanted to bring up something from that Svetlana Boym book because I think it kind of keys in on what you're getting at here, which is, she theorizes that there are two different kinds of nostalgia, restorative and reflective. The idea about the restorative is these are the kind of people who want to go back to a golden age. They want to, make America great again. And the reflective nostalgia that she kind of looks at is that you look at the past critically. You don't accept that things were better back then. You accept that things were different. And you look for the elements that were better and you look for the elements that were worse. And one of the things I think we've done really well over the past 2 seasons of WKRP is be really, really honest and forthright about the stuff that's made us cringe and squirm and made us uncomfortable and what that means. Like, it's very easy to say that the humor in Young Master Carlson didn't work for us because it was just, so awfully racially tinged. But we wanted to kind of explore on a further level, why that happened. Why did the writers decide that was a good way to go?
Yeah.
And I think, when we talked about unions last week, I especially have been very sort of complimentary of them, but they had their problems, not just the racial stuff, but there was corruption and there was mob influence and there were all these things. Being critical of the past, I mean, it's the central tenet of any historian. But, nostalgia is an emotion. Nostalgia is something deeper than that. And I think that, what we're talking about is avoiding that romanticization of what the past was like.
Oh, that's outstanding. What were the two modes that you said again?
Restorative and reflective. So restorative is where all the conspiracy theories, like, there's people pulling the strings and we need to go back to a point when they weren't pulling the strings kind of thing.
Right.
And reflective, again, is taking that past and maybe being a little humorous about it, maybe poking fun at it a little bit.
Yeah, comic, ironic. This is sort of, that's so great that you read that because I didn't know that quote. But what I was thinking about was sort of, is there a tragic and a comic mode of nostalgia? Like it's very easy for history and certainly nostalgia to slip into a tragic mode, into the story of decline and fall, that everything is a declension narrative. That's a historian's, $64 word for decline, things falling apart. There's a natural tendency for that, but that's not what I want this to be. I really think that we need to be sort of comic and ironic about history. And what I mean by that is that, time is like the universal solvent. This is what you learn when you get older, is that, everything you think is cool, is crucial, is important, is going to turn uncool. It's going to go out of style. It's going to become ridiculous. You will become ridiculous. Kids who know nothing about anything will laugh at the things you love and think they know better simply because they arrived late. Right?
Yeah.
And in the same way, all of our pretensions and hubrises, like if historical periods, the cracks will show, whether it's the Great Society, the liberal consensus of the mid-20th century, the cracks are going to show, or whether it's, neoliberalism, hypercapitalism of our own age. You don't like it? Stick around, because it's going to change. The cracks will show. The mighty are brought low. People get shown up, and
we can hope. We can only hope.
Well, I think that I think in time, time mocks all pretensions and makes everyone sort of ridiculous, right? Oh, when you were on Netflix, Dylan said something great, because of course he's a younger guy than us, and he said something like, I'm aware of the 80s. Like he said something about the 80s, and he said, well, yeah, I've heard of the 80s, so I'm aware of the 80s. And I like that because.
Did you see the look on my face, even though it was a podcast? Because I had a look. I definitely was sort of like, that slow sort of dropping of the jaw.
Sure, yeah. Well, because you and me are from the 80s.
Yes, we are.
But, I think that, we should strive to not be provincial, but to be cosmopolitan. To be cosmopolitan is to be a citizen of the world. So we should strive to be a Cleopolitan, a citizen of history, which is to say that, like, someone who's cosmopolitan doesn't forget where they're from, but they travel and they acknowledge the best of every age. And, they're not tourists, they're travelers, and they learn from different places, and they learn from different, societies. And in the same way, every era has its contribution to make. And, so I think we need to be kind of cosmopolitan citizens of history and appreciate every time for its own time, while knowing that, no one has a monopoly on the truth, and that all of us will be made ridiculous in the end, and all that can coexist with the fact that we're from where we're from. And so there's a way in which like Proust's Madeleine, like WKRP or a Huey Lewis song is always going to sort of take me somewhere that, that it doesn't take other people. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to stand on the street corner with the sandwich board saying the end is near.
Or, let's all time travel back to 1978 and do things the right way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, I wanted to say that about nostalgia because, you're right. We've tried to both indulge nostalgia and, in different ways, explore its limits and its dangers.
So take me away. I don't mind, but you better promise me I'll be back in time.
We mentioned earlier that we're going to be taking another between season hiatus, and I think this is a good thing for us to do. I said on Facebook a few weeks ago, let's recharge our batteries, get ourselves all set for season 3. And we've said, Rob, season 3, my gosh, the episodes in that season are going to be tremendous.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun. There's some heavy hitters there, and there's some that just are going to give us a ton to talk about.
Yeah.
We're right into the 80s. So it's going to be great. So we're not going away. We're taking a rest, but we're not going away. You will see us on the internets and all the places on iTunes, on Twitter, on Facebook. We'll be there.
Yeah.
And, and reach out to us, during the hiatus. We'd love to hear from you. And don't worry, we'll let you know when we're coming back.
And you know what? If you have just found us, this is a great time to go back and listen. And as I said earlier, if you haven't just found us, this is a great time to go back and re-listen. You'll have some weeks to go back through our back catalog of hits.
That's right. Listen to the recap episode from season 1. It was good. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
We're online at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which, believe it or not, wasn't taken. We're also available on iTunes, and we always appreciate your iTunes subscriptions, reviews, ratings, and downloads. So get on there and give us some stars.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
If you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.